So this is pretty cool. The first time I've been able to address the Ethereum community and talk about winemaking and organic viticulture. So before you say off topic completely, what I'm going to try to, in this time we have together, is explain how I think that wine is actually a really interesting, I don't want to call it a commodity, but an interesting item. It's the best thing that we can use to talk about tokenization. And to do so, I'm going to talk about a project that I've been working on called Open Vino for the last 2 years. So my name is Mike Barrow. I'm an IT person from 30 years, working mostly in the Unix, Linux, data center, cloud services space. But in 2003, without putting too much thought or due diligence into it, decided to buy a small piece of property in Mendoza, Argentina. This is in the west of Argentina. It's the kind of the epicenter of wine production there. Argentina is the 5th, 6th largest, depending on how you look at it, wine producer. And so I kind of immersed myself in this project to do a small boutique winery, at the same time continuing to do IT stuff. But really without having any idea what I'm doing, no background in agriculture, viticulture, production. My only real experience is I drink a lot. I like a lot of, any wine drinkers here? So, good. So that's kind of what pushed me into this. After doing the first harvest, first vintage in 2007, I said, well, this should be easy. I'll take advantage of the fact that I'm working in different places around the world, in India doing a data center project at the time, and start taking bottles under my arm, and how difficult can it be to sell wine? And I come across a series of questions that I think lines up really well, and you'll see on a solution set that we can do an actual real-world physical, dirt thing that we can solve with Ethereum. So this is what the Open Vino project is. My company is called Costa Flores, and I have a wine called Mike Tango Bravo. It's a blend of Malbec, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Sauvignon. But basically, all this experience going to traditional, wine fairs, uncorking bottles, restaurants, contests, and all these types of things, I come across 3 questions over and over again. And the first one is, what price should I set my wine to be? Now, we have an idea of, well, my cost is X, I want to make Y for profit, and the better the quality, the more expensive your wine is. And that's not really how it works. If I go into a wine shop or a restaurant and say, here's my organic Malbec from Mendoza, they're not going to say, great, uncork it, let's taste it, or how much is it? They're not really concerned with that. Their main concern is, look, I already have 27 wines on my menu. Why is somebody going to ask for yours? So once you've created a need for the market, then we can discuss what the price should be. So at the end of the day, I find that some places I go to, my product's too expensive, and other places it's not expensive enough. So really what I want to get to is, how can I let the market decide what the price of my wine is, right? So you can see where I'm going with this. We're tokenizing our wine production and letting the market define the price. The second question is more of a curiosity. I mean, I see cases, pallets of wine going out of the winery, and I wonder who's drinking them, where they're going. I mean, I have a general idea if I'm selling to an importer in India or selling in Argentina, Brazil, and Spain, but I don't know if it's ending up at somebody's birthday party, if they're drinking home alone, if they're drinking at the right temperature, what they're really thinking, and what is their experience drinking this. So how could I do extreme traceability, right? Which I call vine, wine, dine, mind. Like, how can I get into the head of the person that's actually drinking it to see what they think about it? So that's the second question. But the third one I think is the most interesting, and it has to do with extreme transparency and honesty, right? So I'm doing an organic production, and I realize that when I'm talking to people, I say, you know, look, we toss 40% of the grapes on the ground. We're only harvesting when it's the right time. And we put a lot of love into our production, and there's a lot of quality concerns. And then I realize, yeah, but what winery doesn't say that, right? And there's so much deception in marketing that it's really hard to distinguish who's telling the truth and who's not. So not too long ago, I was in Ribera del Duero in Spain, and I went to visit a friend's place. His cousin has 10 hectares in Tempranillo, a really beautiful grape. And we're looking at it. He's got this little stone hut outside, and a little barbecue, a little table. And in this really beautiful place. And he says, oh, you like this? And he pulls out his phone and says, let me show you an advertisement that was filmed here 2 weeks ago. So it's this sweeping, panning advertisement. You see the vineyard in the background, and you see a woman extending a tablecloth on the table, and kids are running around, and people are clinking glasses. And the voiceover is, in our family for generations, we've been doing this wine, and we only do the best grapes, and you know, the typical speech. And you look at it and you go, it's not their vineyard, it's not their kids, it's not their barbecue. So is there some way that people can say, Mike's not bullshitting when he's telling me this, right? So why not make an open source winery and use the blockchain to address these three questions of extreme transparency, traceability, and tokenization. And the transparency and tokenization is fairly obvious. The last one about traceability is what we call you drink it, you own it. How can we convert the consumer, the drinker, into a partner? So let's look at the transparency layer first. This is essentially using sensors in the vineyard, so IoT. We have a Raspberry Pi in the middle of the vineyard, connected through LoRa to what's called Vino. So it's basically an Arduino with sensors, collecting the data, encapsulating this, signing it, and putting this into a sidechain. Bitácora, this would be a log. So I want to know what happens in the vineyard every day. What happens in the winery? And how can we communicate this? Cameras, 360-degree camera. But the most interesting part is about the business layer. What if we shared all the data? How much we spent on the bottle, on the label, on the box, on taxes, how much we sold in each place. And then publish that. And essentially, do we need blockchain here? Not specifically, any database could take this. But I want to do self-certification for organics, for fair trade, and use the blockchain as a mechanism for non-repudiation. So this opens up a different way to communicate ethical business practice and share all of the intellectual property, how much we're spending, how much we're doing, how much we're paying, if we're paying our taxes, and collect information from the community. Now, this also attaches to a problem which you see here. The problem that there's so much confusion and manipulation in packaging and labeling. So this is my deodorant here, and it says naturally derived, I don't know what that means, cruelty-free, aluminum-free, gluten-free, and please recycle. Okay, obviously none of these really mean much. The only one of these labels that actually has any meaning is Indian and Continental 90% vegan. So there's a lot of manipulation. In the wine world, you can't really see this, but in the wine world, this is even worse. We have natural wines, conventional wines, organic wines, which here would be biologique. We have biodynamic wines, and the consumer doesn't really know what the difference is. Okay, so now let's look at the price. At what price should I set my wine? Well, I think an interesting thing when we're talking about cryptocurrency, tokenization, crypto assets, the biggest problem we have is that people don't really understand money in this conversation. So here we have a painting on the left. Cy Twombly Bacchus sold in 2005 for around 20 million euro. And on the right, Pingus, which is Spanish wine, 2,500 euro today for the 2005. Now, the difference in these two items is that we can all look at the painting and have our opinion about what the price should be. But the bottle of wine on the right is something that has no intrinsic value. It's a piece of glass. It represents a future potential experience. It represents something of value if we open it, but then again, when we open it, it becomes worthless. So in that sense, it's more like a 100 euro note or a token. So let's talk about a wine-backed crypto asset. How does it work? So the bottom's cut off here, but basically how it works is in April, we harvest the grapes. Into March, beginning of April. Southern hemisphere, so opposite from here. Once we've finished the fermentation process, which is 2-3 weeks, we pretty much know how many liters of wine we're going to have. And wine is also a pretty controlled substance in that it's a food source, it has alcohol, so I have to declare to the regulators in Argentina how many liters of wine I have, which tank it's in. It's not something I can just make up. So at the end of April, beginning of May, we know exactly how many liters we're talking about. And therefore, we can emit the equivalent amount of tokens for bottles. So we did this last year. It was our first ICO, let's call it. And we issued 16,384 ERC20 tokens, called MTB18 for the 2018 harvest. And this is equivalent to the 16,384 bottles. So we put those up for sale, sold roughly half of the tokens during the ICO. We're keeping a quarter of the tokens to spend on marketing, to use as a funding for payment, and also keeping some of the tokens so that, if a pallet falls in the winery and breaks, I have some sort of way to make sure that we still have enough wine for the tokens that are in circulation. Now, starting in September, we went on to Ripio, which is one of the largest exchanges in Latin America. And there's a pairing right now for the Argentine peso and for the Brazilian real, and soon for BTC and ETH. So this is where the fluctuation comes in, volatility. And this is how we want the market to define what the price should be. Now, in this particular case, 2018, so the cycle works like this. We finish the fermentation, it goes into tanks and oak barrels for 1 year, and then 2 years in bottle. So basically it's 3 years before these wines are ready to drink. So in 2021, on the 6th of May, we'll release the 2018 vintage, and then anyone that's holding the tokens at the time can send the tokens to our e-commerce site, pay the shipping expenses, wherever they might be, and basically we burn the token at that point. So I'm not trying to create a $1,000 wine. What I'm trying to do is, first, allow the marketplace to define the price. And so when somebody comes up to me and say, what's the cost of your wine? I'll say, well, which year are we talking about? The 2020. Well, let's look. The price is X. And there's a certain honesty that I'm allowing the marketplace to define that. So what's going to happen with the token? I don't know. This is an experiment. There's some beautiful projects that I'm seeing here at the conference. I came last year. And the sensation that I have is that there's a ton of really interesting things that are happening. You guys have been to all these different talks. But there isn't a lot of real-world applications that people, like in my case, are actually betting the farm on this to see what happens. So we just started in 2018. We're preparing now for the ICO for 2019. And there's a question is the token going to mirror the arc of quality of the wine? Is it going to reflect scarcity over time? Why should a wine have the same price from the minute it's finished fermentation to the minute it hits the street till the last bottles are leaving the winery? There should be some difference, and let's let the market define what that is. It's also interesting because the speculation that could happen from a crypto investor, somebody that's speculating with the price of it, is quite different from somebody who's buying it for the wine, either to drink it or to resell it. And so the idea here is that it doesn't matter to me if the price goes up or down. At some point, if the price crashes and it's near the bottom, all I have to do is talk to my traditional importers and resellers and say, you know the wine you've been buying for the past 10 years, it's a steal if you get it right now, just go on the exchange and buy the tokens. Okay, so the last part is the transparency part. And how do we evaluate quality? Well, right now we can evaluate quality by looking at essentially 3 ways. We can ask an expert. So Robert Parker says this is 93 points, or the wine critic of your choice. We can say, of course, try it yourself. That's the best way to evaluate anything. Or we can do crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing opinion in wine world is Vino, but TripAdvisor, it's the same kind of aspect. People are voluntarily voting on it. But we know that this is a very flawed system because people have no incentive to vote on something. Usually if they've had a bad experience is when they vote. That's when people tend to use the TripAdvisor model. So what's another way of doing it? We call it you drink it, you own it. And basically it looks like this. When the bottles of tokenized wine are available on the street, so starting in May of 2021, doesn't matter how you got the bottle in your hand. Maybe you bought it with tokens and I sent it to you. Maybe you bought it in a shop in paying fiat and the shop bought it in tokens. Or maybe somebody gave you the bottle. Doesn't matter. Now you have the bottle in your hand. Be able to scan the back label, serialized. And then this will take you to download an app, introduce name, address, maybe a tax ID number, age, information about yourself, geolocation, take a selfie with the bottle, and answer a series of questions about your experience drinking that particular bottle. But in exchange for this tremendous invasion of your privacy, which of course is completely optional, what we'll do is give you one token, which is a different token, that represents 1 share of the company. So now you've gone from being a consumer to being a partner. The liquid that you have in your glass, you actually own that liquid, right? And so now let me ask you what you think about the wine. And by the way, this enables us, because we're publishing all of the accounting data and the data from the vineyard from the winery, this allows us to do all kinds of things as far as deciding how dividends are distributed, voting rights, and all these fun things that you can imagine, right? But we can go one step further. So now you have an app. You've given me all your data voluntarily because now you're part owner of the company. This is actual shares of an Argentine corporation. And now we can ask you a question. Do you want to play a game? And in this case, it can be, you can participate in one of 5 categories. So you could be study viticulturist, right, how to grow grapes, enologist, how to make wine, sommelier, a wine merchant, or a blockchain IoT specialist, and to participate in one of these 5 categories. And it's basically a didactic game. We give you little snippets of information to study about, these different categories, but occasionally ask questions. And if you answer the questions, you win points. If you don't answer the question or you answer incorrectly, you lose points. And these could be trivia type questions, but for the most part, wherever possible, we want to ask you questions that are related to the data that we're publishing. So if I ask you, should we irrigate the Cabernet Sauvignon? The form that you would know to answer the question would be go to look at the sensor data. So now you're a partner acting in a sense as a Turk machine, validating the data that we're producing from the sensors, learning about wine, and earning points, which at the end of the year we basically do a bounty and say 10% of all the vintage tokens we distribute to the game players in the form of token coins for the vintage. So you're earning money by playing the game. You're a known entity because in order for you to collect your shares, I have to do an effective KYC. And by the way, since this is a sort of a security token, it allows us to call into question the Howey test, because now you're not only a passive investor that has received shares of the company, you're an active investor. We've decentralized farming. We've created a Farmville with a real farm behind it, right? So this is the idea of you drink it, you own it. How can we take our consumers and turn them into active participants? So we have the utility token for the vintage and the security tokens for the shares. So the concept of vine, wine, dine, mind. Collecting business data, user perception, and data from the vineyard. Now before you poo-poo this and say, oh, but at the end of the day, all you've done is created an ERC20 token to represent bottles, and you have some sensor data going onto your own side chain. There's no bonding curves here. We're not doing any kind of voting algorithms or any of these types of things. Let me just say that because this is a real world example, it's in production, we're actively dealing with the lemon coin problem. For those of you familiar with the lemon coin video, basically 90% of the people that have bought our tokens in this first year are first-time crypto users. So this is an ICO done in Argentina. We both had a crowd sale where you could send Ether to a smart contract and receive the tokens. You could also go on the site and use credit card, PayPal, Bitcoin. And up front, we collected information about you because I need to send out an invoice, collect VAT on the sale, and you bought a bottle of wine. So it's essentially, how do we do this in a place where I can collect the Ether, and I think I'm probably the first person to turn Ether into goat manure, because that's a really good organic fertilizer. And without breaking any laws in Argentina. So there's a lot more complexity when you actually take some of these technologies we're talking about and map them to a real world situation. So I think that's why wine is a really delicious metaphor for money, but also for a tokenized asset. If you want to know more about the wine or the project, costaflores.com, we've got a few videos and information. Wiki.costaflores.com is where all of the information, all the code for the sensors, for the smart contracts, for everything is published. All of the intellectual property is there, and we invite anybody to participate and share with that, and also openvino.org. So thank you very much. And I think I have only about 30 minutes for questions, so if anybody has any questions. Oh, you have a microphone?
No, it is test like this. So one question about, so when you produce wine, you publish a token, and then you set the price of the token. So
yes.
If I buy a token at that moment, basically I'm owning a bottle of a wine.
Correct.
What is happening if I never claim that token for a wine?
Okay, so we're setting the price at the ICO each year. Remember, this is an annual process.
Okay.
This first year we set it at cost price because that's the only non-arbitrary number I have to start with. But that doesn't mean we'll be doing it at cost every year. Basically, we'll take the medium from last year's price on the exchange and our cost and divide it in half, and that's where we'll set each year to be the new ICO price. But yeah, you bought it with one token, you bought a bottle of wine, and either when that wine is available, and it could be available immediately, it doesn't have to mean that you don't have to buy it at the time of vintage occurs, or the fermentation. You could buy it at any time. So if we're in 2025, you could buy the MTB 25 token and wait 3 years for the bottle. You could buy the MTB 22 token for a wine that just hit the street, or you could buy what's ever left of the MTB 18 from the exchange and cash those in. Now, we give you a 10-year window, and after 10 years, if you haven't cashed in your token, then I'm going to drink it or auction it off or whatever it is, because I can't keep it in cold storage forever.
Yes, yes. I was asking about the storage because basically, if you have a good year, I'm betting on a good year and waiting for 10 years and got a really.
Yeah,
really
you could
good
speculate and keep the token for 10 years. So the idea is, again, is to juxtapose or counterpose these two forces. So you might have bought a token, let's say, for $5 in the ICO. And for whatever reason, the token's now at 100. And you could say, yeah, I like Mike's wine, but I don't think it's a $100 wine. I'm going to sell my tokens off. Well, as soon as you start to do that, anybody that was speculating in the token itself as a crypto speculator is also going to say, hey, the party's over, let's cash out, and now the price is going to drop. Okay, let's say it plummets all the way to 50 cents a token.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, then that's fine. I mean, it's that you're not going to sell it if you've got it at 50 cents because you'd rather drink it. And all I have to do is remind the traditional channel, importers, distributors, wine shops, say, hey, you can get the wine for 50 cents a bottle and sell it at whatever price you want in fiat. So,
yeah. And how do you plan to scale this on other wineries? Is this basically some kind of a showcase and then you will offer a service?
I think that there's enough questions still out there. Some of it has to do with the technology. Some of it has to do with business models. Some has to do with how this is going to overlap with regulation, shipping. There's so many questions right now that I don't really know how this is going to scale. A lot of wineries have come to us and say, great, we want to do something like that. What do we have to do? My first answer is, well, it's all on the wiki. You can download it and try it yourself, but why don't you wait a couple of years to see what things work and what don't, right? It is pretty much an experiment. We're in production. I have bet my business on this. I can't go back now from this, but that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be adjustments. So I'm not really focused on the scaling, on how to sell. It's an open source project. It does have a certain aspect as well, which is marketing. So we've got blockchain, IoT, organic, single vineyard wine. The last part is we're just starting to work with a startup from Oxford that's doing quantum nonlinear spectroscopy, which is an array of lasers that allows you to analyze what wine it is, so to know if it's a Malbec, a Cabernet, what year it's from, without opening the bottle, right? So if you can put the word quantum there you go. That's another interesting thing. Right. So yeah, I don't really know.
So you've kind of answered one of the questions that I had, which was about pricing.
Yes.
But you mentioned this is your first tokenized harvest, but have you had any other harvests that have sold in the market before? Like, even if not tokenized, just bottles that are actually out there.
Oh yeah, so my first harvest was 2007. So I've been making wine for over 10 years before even doing this. And right now we're basically we're selling off the last of the non-tokenized bottles at the same time. I had to start somewhere.
Sure. No, just curious if there was like let's say a history of reviews that users could base their
Yeah, no,
judgment
there's a reputational history from making wine over these years. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really nice to do tokenization, blockchain, extreme transparency, IoT, sensors, apps and scanning out the back. But if the wine's no good, it doesn't make any sense, right? So yeah, that have to start there.
And one question regarding the operational aspects, because I'm curious that this is definitely one of those cases of crypto touching the real world. You mentioned that since you're effectively selling people a bottle of wine, you had to charge VAT on it, right? But this, at least from me in the abstract, would have seemed more like getting a future contracts on a certain number of bottles that may or may not be delivered, and that the VAT needs to be paid by the final recipient.
Well, the idea here is that we don't want to do, we're not crowdfunding, so I'm not saying, here's what I'm going to do, here's my beautiful purple paper about wine, give me money and I'm going to go make wine and give it to you later. No, it's after we've already finished the fermentation, it's in it's in the bank, let's say, right? It's in a controlled area. I can't just take it anywhere, right? Either the cold storage or the fermentation, the after fermentation in tanks is a controlled area, and there's enough documentation backing it up to say, yes, this is a real thing. So in that sense, it's not a futures market. You're not predicting what's going to happen next year. Now, in the first years, if you're buying it right, the token at the time when fermentation is finished, yes, you do have to wait 3 years, and yes, something could go wrong with it. If there's an earthquake and all the bottles are smashed for 1 year, the best I can do is offer you a bottle from the next year. It's not what you bought, but I could do that. But yeah, I'm not saying there's no risk to the consumer here, but it isn't a typical ICO where you're giving me money to something I'm going to do in the future.
I agree. Just was curious about the VAT aspect, but thanks.
Mm-hmm. As far as VAT was concerned, that's, I want to do something that there's no question that there's so much, right now in Argentina, Argentina is a fairly open country towards, in the crypto space. Regulators, we've talked to them and they said, hey, we're not following the rules of the SEC. We're making our own rules, but we're not sure. We're kind of open, help us with this. But we wanted to do, since I'm doing open source company, publishing all of my data, like how much I pay in salaries, how much I pay in taxes. It doesn't make any sense to not be straight up and say, here's the tokens we sold, pay the tax on it, you've got the token. Now that's a voucher. You can cash it in later for a bottle of wine. If you took it to a secondary market, right, to the exchange and sold it to someone else and they sold it to someone else and there's money being made in the middle, that's out of my hands, right? That's, that would be your capital gains if you want to declare it as such. But I've paid the tax up front. I've given you a token that's valid for one wine bottle. Yes.
So for now, your wine is not famous, but imagine that your wine is famous now. What keeps me from keeping your bottle but changing the wine?
Well, as soon as so to get the bottle, you have to send the tokens to me, right?
Yes.
And once you send me the tokens, I burn the tokens and I send you the bottle of wine, right? So now you can do whatever you like with it. Now, if you say, I'm going to manipulate that particular bottle and put some horrible wine in it, I guess that's your point. That could happen in any case. There's nothing I can really do about that. Now, if I have the fact that I'm doing an extreme traceability, where I'm incentivizing you to become a partner with me by opening the bottle, answering the questionnaire, receiving a token as part of a company, right? I know who you are, and by the way, you can't give me a pseudonym if you actually want to have a legal share of the company. So, that could always be the case. Somebody can maliciously adulterate your wine just to affect it, but...
Yes, but I think the impact is more important on your side rather than on my side.
Yes, but what's your incentive to do that?
I don't know, maybe I'm your competitor, I want to do something bad for you.
Maybe, I mean there are horrible people out there, what can I say? But the fact is I'm doing such a small quantity, I'm not anybody's competition. So yeah, but that could happen in any case without any of the tokenization.
Thank you.
So right now, if you can go to costaflores.com and see more information about this. Right now we're on Ripio on the exchange. It's about €5, I think, for a token. It's gone from about 3 to 5 in a year. The fact is we've had very little volume because of the exchange I started with. They're taking it offline and put it back online to include Brazil. So it's paired with Brazil and Argentina as sort of the fiat. And it'll be happening now with, so in Ripio.com for this exchange, or just go to costaflores.com and hashtag open Vino. So thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, there's one last question.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to get clarity on the concept of you buy it, you own it, and you said that
you drink it, you own it.
Maybe
you drink it, you own
it.
Yeah.
You get given a token as an incentive for feedback. Is that public feedback or is that just for the company? Is it because you positioned it as opposed to experts giving their opinion on wine?
Right.
My worry is that if you're being given a token, at which you said was equivalent to a share in the company,
yes,
you would just give positive feedback if it was public because you'd want the value of the company to increase in value.
Maybe. I mean, so Dan Ariely, the sociologist, basically does an experiment where he walks into a crowd and he gives a talk, and he's got 10 books that he's published, and he goes, look, I have some books to give out. I don't have one for everybody. And he hands out books to people. And he says, I want you to all to put a number in your head what you think the book's valued at, right? And if you ask the people that received the books, they'll say, it's a $25 book. If you the people that didn't get the book, it's a $10 book. So I'm not saying that there isn't, that couldn't skew some of the data as far as what their response is.
But getting a free book is very different to having a share in a company where you want the company to increase in value. You aren't, in that example, you're not giving people a book and a share of the publisher's rights, for example. So that is a bit different to the question that I'm asking.
No, I understand what you're saying. Am I skewing it? Am I manipulating them by saying, I'm going to give you a share, and now it's in your interest to say good things about it? That's true. But just as our friend over here pointed out, there's a lot of hateful people as well that have no problem giving you their bad opinion of the wine, even if they are a shareholder. So, and in any case, you're going to run up against that barrier and when you're crowdsourcing opinion. All I'm trying to do is to be a bit more honest, to say, if I'm going to ask you to make an intellectual effort to sit down and think about it and answer some questions, I want to give you something in return. And I want to give you something that makes you part of this, and stop being the target as a consumer, but also being a partner and participating in this. And that's why I value your feedback. But I don't disagree that it could have some skewing or effect on your opinion. All right, well, thank you very much.